Genesis 37 and verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I am going to send you to them." "Very well," he replied. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering around in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" He replied, "I am looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are grazing their flocks?" "They have moved on from here," the man answered. "I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the desert, but do not lay a hand on him," Reuben said. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty, there was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. God so loved the world that he sent Abram. Those words are not found in Scripture in that order, in that way. But you will find in Genesis that Abraham and his lineage were God's answer to the fall. Abraham and his lineage were how God planned to reverse the curse of the fall. From Genesis chapter 3 to Genesis 11, the word curse is repeated 5 times. It is no accident that when God calls Abram, the word blessing is repeated 5 times, just in Genesis 12. God commissioned Adam and Eve to multiply. And despite the curse, after the fall, Adam and Eve did multiply. The book of Genesis lists 70 families, 70 nations that came out of Adam and Eve. But much of Adam and Eve's family lose their way and they wander away from God. The story takes a turn when God calls Abram. You'll remember God commissioned Adam and Eve to multiply. To Abram, God promises to fulfill this commission himself. God says, Genesis 17, "I will make my covenant between me and you," and God says, "I will multiply you exceedingly." God says to Abraham, "I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you." So a royal lineage was promised Abraham. Abram's lineage would be a lineage of kings. In fact, when the book of Genesis ends, it shows God's faithfulness to Abraham. Just like Adam and Eve became a father and mother of 70 families, Abram's line at the end of Genesis also grows to 70 nations and families. God is showing through this that he was beginning a new humanity, a new human family through Abram. God so loved the world that he sent Abram. Abram was the answer to the curse of the fall. It was through Abram's lineage that God was beginning to reverse the curse from the fall of Adam and Eve. The kingly lineage that issued from Abraham and Sarah would bring God's rule, God's justice, God's way, God's righteousness into the world. Ishmael was Abraham's firstborn son through his Egyptian slave, but he was not chosen to be the bearer of the royal lineage. And this begins, or rather continues, a pattern in which firstborn sons do not inherit the royal lineage. The secondborn was Isaac. Isaac was chosen. When God tested Abraham, Isaac willingly, obediently offered himself as a sacrifice. Isaac's obedience became the first clarification, became the first focusing of the image of what was promised to Adam and Eve. Isaac was the first one you could say, the serpent crushing seed of the woman, this is what that seed will look like. He will be obedient, willing to lay his life down. The promised seed would be someone like Isaac. Among Isaac's sons, his firstborn son was Esau. Now we said firstborn sons get passed over. So did Esau. He was passed over, and the secondborn, Jacob, would be the bearer of the royal line. Jacob's life showed a little clearer that the promised serpent-crushing seed that God had made a covenant with Eve with, that promised seed would be like Jacob in that God would mature the seed through suffering. He would have to go through deep suffering. Now, Jacob is the bearer of the royal seed. Jacob has not just one or two sons, he has 12 sons. Among Jacob's 12th son, once again, like we said, the firstborn is passed over. But another son took an early lead as the candidate for the kingly lineage. Early on, the 11th son, Joseph, had a dream. He freely shared that dream with the rest of his family. Here it is in Genesis 37, verse 7. Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. Joseph's brothers immediately recognized that Joseph was laying claim to kingly lineage and kingship. You can see it in their response. And his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream, and he told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." The sun, the moon, and the stars were created in the 6 days of creation. They were created as rulers, if you will remember. God commissioned these heavenly bodies to rule the day and to rule the night. They become symbols of kingship and rulership. When Joseph tells his brothers that the sun, the moon, and the stars would bow down to him, he was communicating to them that he was going to be a ruler above rulers. Each of them would be chieftains. He would rule above them. They would bow down to him. Joseph's brothers recoiled in horror because they saw already hints, very real hints, that all these dreams had some substance behind them. One hint was that from a very early age, Joseph showed a maturity that was beyond his years. The Bible tells us, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age." That phrase, son of old age, could mean that Joseph was born when Jacob was very old. But then the Bible doesn't say that about Benjamin. Benjamin was born after Joseph. And this isn't said about him. The phrase son of old age is not used for Isaac, who was born to Abraham when he was 100 years old. Another way to understand this phrase, son of old age, is that this phrase meant that Joseph was a son who, even at a very young age, had the maturity and wisdom of someone of old age. Another hint the brothers saw right in front of them that Joseph might indeed be ruler over them was that Joseph was being commissioned by his father to inspect and oversee the rest of the brothers. Genesis 37, verse 13 and 14 says, "And Israel said to Joseph, 'Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them.' So he said to them, 'Here I am.' Then he said to Joseph, 'Please go see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back a report to me.'" Signs of Joseph's rulership over them were only confirmed when Jacob clothed Joseph with an ornamental royal robe. Often in Scripture, the placing of a robe is a symbol of royal rule and authority. When the brothers plot against Joseph, they speak bitterly about the dream and the robe. These two go together. In their minds, both the dreams and the robe together signify Joseph's rulership over them. So much so that when they decide to overthrow Joseph, they make sure they do away with the robe. They take away the robe. They throw him into a pit to kill him. Judah, fourthborn, one of the brothers, recognizing that killing Joseph would sully them needlessly, bring them no profit, he uses his cunning to help his brothers see that Joseph was a valuable commodity. He could be sold, you'd get a profit. Couldn't get that if you just killed him, could you? They sold him to Ishmaelite traders and made a profit. For his pretensions of kingship, Judah believes the right response is for him to be sold at the very bottom as a slave. The brothers make it a point to underscore for Joseph, that he will know his place and never again try to ascend with illusions of kingship. It's interesting, however, that the lower Joseph went, the closer he got to kingship. Joseph was sold by the Ishmaelites as a slave to Potiphar, who incidentally happened to be the captain of the guard to the king of Egypt. Joseph was a slave in Potiphar's house. The Bible tells us that the Lord gave Joseph favor, and his diligence in his work resulted in Joseph becoming an overseer and ruler over all of Potiphar's house. Joseph is a slave, but even as a slave, Joseph is somehow a ruler. Like Joseph's brothers, Joseph's rulership vexes some. Joseph's brothers took away his coat. Potiphar's wife takes away his garment. Just like Joseph's brothers threw him into a pit, Potiphar throws him into a dungeon. But here also, Joseph has fallen lower still, and yet, the lower Joseph goes, the closer Joseph gets to rulership and kingship. The dungeon that Joseph is placed in is no ordinary dungeon. It is the prison where the king's prisoners are kept. In prison, once again, God favors Joseph. The keeper of the prison entrusted Joseph with all the prison affairs and put all prison affairs under Joseph's authority. It seems as if this man can't go anywhere unless he is made ruler, unless he is given authority over things under him. The lower Joseph goes, the closer he gets to rulership and authority. When Joseph was brought out of prison, he interprets Pharaoh's dreams. Pharaoh sets him as second in command over all of Egypt. The Bible tells us, Genesis 41, then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Notice the language of rulership once again. Jacob had recognized that Joseph was going to be a ruler, and Jacob clothed Joseph with a robe. Up until now, people who have been trying to unseat Joseph have been removing Joseph's clothing away from him so as to show him his right and proper place. Now, Pharaoh places Joseph in rulership, and as the first act, Pharaoh clothes Joseph with a royal robe. The Bible tells us, Genesis 41 again, then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him with garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. The next verse reads a proclamation from Pharaoh. And he, Pharaoh, had him, Joseph, ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Ever since Adam and Eve were promised that a royal seed, a seed would come who would crush the serpent's head, all those who read Genesis are waiting to see who is the seed. They want some clues to know who this seed is. What will this seed look like? Finally, we get an answer. This seed will look like Joseph. Everything about Joseph's life says royalty, ruler, king, authority. Even when Joseph is in prison, he still rules. If there was anyone in Genesis about whom you could say, this person looks like the royal seed promised to Adam and Eve, you say, this is it. It's Joseph. So it's all the more curious that when Jacob, his father, becomes old, and the time comes for Jacob to bless his sons, Jacob does not bless Joseph with the blessing of royal lineage. Shockingly, that blessing goes to Judah. Judah, the brother who sold Joseph into slavery. Judah, who jealously conspired along with his brothers to strip off Joseph's coat and rip it to shreds, dip it in a goat's blood, and present it to his father Jacob. That Judah received the blessing of royal kingship. Joseph was passed over, and Judah got the blessing. Jacob blessed Judah this way: Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. And here are the key words: the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Why did treacherous Judah receive the blessing of royal lineage instead of Joseph? Why did Judah receive that blessing? Just when Joseph had been separated from his brothers and gone to a foreign land, Judah also left his brothers and went to another land. He married a Canaanite woman, and Judah had 3 sons. His first 2 sons did what was wicked in the Lord's eyes, and we read in the book of Genesis that the Lord put them to death. Judah had given his first son a wife named Tamar, also a Canaanite. When the first son died, Tamar, his widow, was given to the second son to carry on the family line. Judah's second son also did what was evil in God's eyes, and the Bible tells us that the Lord put him to death. Judah was lost with 2 sons. He was left with 1. You will remember that when Jacob saw the tattered, bloodied garments of Joseph, the book of Genesis piles line upon line to convey Jacob's grief. Jacob tore his garments, put on sackcloth, mourned for his son many days. Jacob remained keeled over and refused to be consoled. He longed to die himself and join his son in death rather than continue living. That is how Jacob reacted when he lost 1 son. And we know later on that he didn't lose that son anyway. Judah lost not 1 son, but 2 sons. And yet, Judah seems cold. There's no mention of Judah ever weeping over them. Judah focuses on his daughter-in-law Tamar. Judah perhaps thought, she was married to my first son and he died. She was married to my second son and he died. She's bad luck. I'm not going to give her to my third son. Never mind the family line. He sent her away to her mother's house, and he seemed to have conveniently cast aspersions on her reputation and sent her away. In a time when childlessness was a matter of deep shame, Judah denied Tamar the privilege of marriage. He refused to give his last son in marriage to Tamar. Life was hard for widows in general. It was doubly hard for a widow with the stigma that Tamar carried. Lost 2 husbands. While Judah denied his daughter-in-law Tamar the chance to marry, Judah enjoyed the privileges of marriage for a long time. After Judah's Canaanite wife died, he became a widower. He became a widower with certain hungers. Judah resorted to looking for a prostitute. Unknown to him, his daughter-in-law Tamar used this opportunity, his hungers, to find justice in her own way. she disguised herself as a prostitute. She planted herself where she knew Judah might come to assuage his hungers. Judah arrived, and when he asked for her services, she asked him how he planned to pay for said services. Judah didn't have anything on hand. He promised to send this prostitute a goat as payment. Tamar was wearing the disguise of a prostitute, and she asked him for a guarantee until payment was delivered. The guarantee she asked for, we read in Genesis 38, was your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand. Evidently, these were important articles of a man's honor and dignity. Judah gave her his seal, its cord, and his staff in the expectation that these would be returned to him when he delivered the goat. The Bible says, so he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. Once the encounter was over, both of them go their separate ways. Judah returned home and sent a friend with the goat, the payment for the prostitute. Judah told the friend, trying to rehabilitate his image, that this payment was for a shrine prostitute. He has elevated her status for his own sake. His friend goes looking for a shrine prostitute, and the villagers say, there's no shrine prostitute here. Embarrassed, he returns, never having found this person. This was embarrassing for Judah. He had gone to see a common prostitute. He had used her so callously. Now she had his seal, his staff, and he couldn't find her to get these back. Judah quietly closed the matter, or so he thought. Some 3 months later, word reached Judah that his widowed daughter-in-law, whom he had sent away, had now become pregnant, wasn't married. Judah was apoplectic with rage. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. He was furious with Tamar for sins which he himself had committed. The Bible tells us, as she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said, and she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. In the Hebrew, her message is far shorter. She uses 2 words, take, see. Judah recognized his seal and staff and said, she is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son, 3rd son. The shock of recognition was doubled for Judah because long ago, Judah and his brothers used the same 2 words Tamar used, take and see, to deceive his father Jacob. Judah and his brothers brought Joseph's tattered, blood-stained coat to their father. Judah didn't tell his father any detail of the story. All Judah tells his father are the words, take, see. He allows Jacob to come up with the story all himself. With great artfulness, Judah simply offers the garment. Jacob comes up with the assumption that a wild animal may have mauled my son and carried him away. When Tamar sent him his seal and staff and used those same 2 words he used to deceive his father so long ago, Judah recognized that the deceiver had been himself deceived. This is Judah, a man who used people as commodities, a cold and heartless man, selling his own brother as a slave, deceiving his father and watching his father writhe in agony for year after year with inconsolable grief, day after day, denying his daughter-in-law the liberties he generously allowed himself. Judah was confronted by his Canaanite daughter-in-law, and Judah recognized, at long last, that she was more righteous than he. It was a moment of deep shame, public shame. But this story is in the Bible because Judah did repent, did recognize, and confess his sin. Tamar became pregnant with Judah's son. They were twin sons, incidentally, just like his father Jacob. The twins were named Perez, which means breakthrough, and Zerah, which means dawn. Judah gave them these names because something had broken through inside of him. He had come through the darkest part of his life. His second son was named Dawn because God's grace had dawned, indeed had dawned upon his life. The brightest evidence that Judah's life had indeed broken through and been filled with light came years later when Joseph, now unrecognizable as the ruler of Egypt, saw the sons of Jacob, his brothers. They bowed down before him. And just as Joseph's dreams foretold so long ago, they made him obeisance. This ruler asked them to go home and bring their youngest brother, Benjamin. Once they returned with Benjamin to Egypt, this unrecognizable ruler said, you need to leave him here as my servant, my slave, while you go back home. Of all the brothers, it was Judah who spoke up at this point. Judah's speech is the third longest speech in Genesis, and here is part of it. Now therefore, as soon as I come to my father, and the boy, Benjamin, is not with us, then as his life is bound up with the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servants will bring down the gray hairs of our father with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that would find my father. All of Judah's destructive jealousy and artful conniving had all melted in the shame and deception and suffering that he himself went through. Judah had once seen all the people around him as people he could use and throw away. His brother Joseph, his father Jacob, his daughter-in-law Tamar. They were all tools he could use and then discard. Now, a transformed Judah was filled with concern and love, true concern and love for Benjamin, so much so that he was willing to give his life in place of Benjamin's. I will stay. I will become your slave. Let the boy go. Why did Judah become the bearer of the royal lineage instead of kingly Joseph? Joseph is what the royal seed would look like when he came. Judah is whom the royal seed came to save. It's whom the royal seed came to transform. You know, all the blessings that were promised to a transformed Judah are blessings that Joseph already enjoyed. Judah was the one to whom his brothers would bow down. Judah's blessing included the words, "Your father's sons will bow down to you." That was what was promised to Joseph. Judah was the one who became ruler and royalty. Down through the ages of Israel's history, whenever Israel packed up and proceeded, Judah's tribe was at the head of the line. Judah's blessing included the words, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the people." Jesus is the true and better Joseph. There's no question about that. It is Jesus who will hold the scepter and reign as King of Kings. Jesus is the true and better Joseph. All of us are Judah. We are fully unworthy, yet inheritors of the blessings promised to Joseph. In the sovereignty of God, God chooses sinners to bear the royal lineage. Ishmael, Jacob, Judah. Rejected. Ishmael rejected for Isaac. Esau rejected for Jacob. Joseph set aside for Judah. Judah is all of us, sinners who reject, betray the Son of God. God is glorified when the Judahs of this world come to reflect the likeness of his Son, the true and better Joseph. This is the privilege given to you and me. What a grace. It is a marvelous grace for us who are betrayers of the Son to now be inheritors of the blessings of the Son.